The morning mist clung low to Oakhaven Academy's lawns as Brielle Faulkner tugged at her worn denim jacket, trying to ward off the chill. Her petite figure was almost lost within the thick material, and her long blonde braid shielded her downcast face, creating a private world. Students swirled around her like leaves in a breeze, their chatter a constant background noise that she'd become skilled at ignoring since moving from Montana last autumn. Brielle tightened her grip on her faded satchel as she made her way toward the main building, her gaze fixed on the cracked pavement. She had mastered the art of blending in, or so she thought, navigating the corridors like a shadow. Her grandfather's gruff voice echoed in her memory, speaking in the drawling cadence of his native Irish. Like the willow lass, yield so you don't shatter. The advice felt empty now, particularly when she spotted the notorious clique of varsity jackets near the science labs. "Well, well, look who's decided to join the living," came the sneering voice that had plagued her thoughts for weeks. Colton Blackwood stood surrounded by his sycophants, his impeccably groomed dark hair gleaming under the dim hallway lights. Towering at nearly 6'3", with shoulders broadened by countless hours of weightlifting, he commanded attention without effort. His piercing green eyes held a malicious spark that Brielle had come to recognize as the prelude to another day of misery. Beside him stood his unwavering lackeys, Finnegan Finn O'Malley, whose mischievous grin and light brown hair might have seemed inviting on anyone else, but whose smirk had become as familiar as her own reflection, and Dominic Dom Rossi, olive-skinned and muscular, who seemed to find genuine delight in the daily spectacle of degradation. They were the undisputed rulers of Oakhaven Academy, their authority reinforced by athletic accolades and familial ties that ran deep within the town's power structure. "Hey, Ghost Girl," Colton drawled, using the nickname that had somehow stuck after someone noticed how pale her skin appeared against her dark clothing. "Did you even bother eating anything today, or are you still living off air and self-pity?" The smattering of students that had gathered snickered, and Brielle felt the familiar wave of humiliation flood her face. She quickened her pace, hoping to slip past them, but Finn stepped sideways, blocking her path with casual precision. "Where do you think you're rushing off to?" Finn's voice dripped with fake concern that made Brielle's stomach churn. "We're just trying to be friendly. Maybe offer you a snack or something." "I'm okay," Brielle mumbled, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the hallway. She attempted to sidestep him, but Dom moved to block her other side, trapping her within a semicircle of cruel smiles. "Okay?" Colton echoed, his voice rising in mock surprise. "Look at you. You're practically see-through. I bet I could blow you over with one breath." He reached out as if to demonstrate, and Brielle recoiled instinctively, bumping into the lockers behind her. The dull thud resonated through the hallway, and more students began to gather, drawn by the familiar drama. Mr. Abernathy strolled past, his leather shoes squeaking on the polished floor, but his eyes remained firmly fixed ahead. Like most of the faculty, he had perfected the art of ignoring the social pecking order that dictated student life. "Please," Brielle managed, her voice stronger now but still shaky. "I just want to get to class." "Just want to get to class," Dom mimicked in a whiny tone, eliciting another wave of laughter from the growing audience. "What class? Advanced invisibility?" Brielle's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she forced herself to remain still. Her grandfather's teachings had instilled in her that true strength came from self-control, from knowing when to stand your ground and when to endure. But more than that, she understood the delicate balance of her situation. One wrong move, one moment of lost composure, and everything would unravel in ways she couldn't foresee. The torment continued as it always did, with calculated precision designed to humiliate without crossing lines that would trigger administrative intervention. They knocked her notebooks from her grasp, trampled on her assignments, and maintained a relentless stream of commentary about her appearance, her family, and her perceived inadequacies. Through it all, Brielle remained silent, gathering her scattered belongings and navigating her day like a small boat, weathering a storm at sea. By lunchtime, she had retreated to her usual haven, the secluded corner of the art studio where the dusty canvases and easels provided a natural barrier between her and the rest of the world. The art instructor, Ms. Albright, was one of the few adults who seemed to acknowledge her existence, occasionally offering a kind smile or a suggestion about her artwork. Today, however, even her quiet presence couldn't alleviate the weight that had settled in her heart. She pulled out her battered sketchbook and flipped through the drawings from her closest friend back in Bozeman, each image a reminder of the life she had left behind. The pictures showed familiar faces, joking about shared experiences she could only observe from afar. The sense of isolation felt complete, a perfect storm of geographic dislocation and social banishment. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted her musings. Brielle looked up to see a girl with kind hazel eyes and short, choppy dark hair pulled back with a colorful bandana. She recognized her from advanced history class, but had never spoken to her directly. "I'm Nadia Petrova. Mind if I sit here?" Brielle shook her head, surprised by the invitation. Nadia settled into the stool across from her, pulling out her own lunch with easy confidence. "I saw what happened this morning," Nadia said softly, unwrapping a burrito. "Those guys are such creeps. I'm sorry you have to put up with that." The sincerity in her voice nearly shattered Brielle's carefully constructed defenses. "It's nothing I can't handle," she replied, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "No one should have to handle that," Nadia said firmly. "Have you considered reporting them? To a counselor, or maybe the vice principal?" Brielle shook her head. "It wouldn't do any good. They're careful not to do anything that would really get them in trouble. And their families." She trailed off, not wanting to voice the sense of hopelessness she felt. Nadia studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you're tougher than you realize. Sometimes the quietest people are the ones who take everyone by surprise." As the days turned into weeks, Nadia's friendship became a lifeline. They sat together in history class, collaborated on art projects, and gradually, Brielle began to feel less invisible. Nadia had a knack for drawing her out, asking about her life in Montana, her hobbies, her aspirations. For the first time since arriving at Oakhaven, Brielle felt like she might actually belong somewhere. But Colton and his cronies noticed the change as well. They began to target Nadia as well, making crude remarks about her clothing and questioning why she would associate with the ghost girl. Nadia handled it with more resilience than Brielle thought possible, deflecting their taunts with quick wit and refusing to be intimidated. "You know," Colton said one afternoon as they passed Nadia and Brielle in the hallway, "I didn't think anyone could be desperate enough to hang out with Casper over there. I guess I was wrong." "Maybe they're made for each other," Finn added with a nasty smirk. "The zombie and the freak." "The what?" Nadia interrupted, stepping forward with her shoulders squared. "Go ahead, finish that sentence. I dare you." The challenge hung in the air like a spark. Colton's eyes narrowed, clearly not accustomed to being confronted so directly. "Careful, Petrova. You don't want to make things worse for yourself." "Or what?" Nadia's voice remained steady, but Brielle could see the tension in her jaw. "You'll what exactly? Bully me like you do her? Real tough, picking on people who won't fight back." The crowd that had gathered sensed the change in dynamics. This wasn't the usual one-sided torment they had grown accustomed to witnessing. This was something different, something that crackled with unspoken consequences. Colton stepped closer, his size advantage obvious. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." "Actually," Nadia said, not backing down, "I think I have a pretty good idea. You're a bully who needs a crowd to feel important. Without your little posse, you're just another insecure kid who peaked in middle school." The words struck their mark. Colton's face flushed red, and for a moment, It seemed like he might actually do something that would cross the line into territory the school couldn't ignore. But then Dom placed a hand on his shoulder and the moment passed. "We'll see about that," Colton said finally, his voice low and menacing. "Both of you." That evening, Brielle found herself pacing her bedroom, replaying the confrontation over and over. Nadia's courage had been inspiring, but it had also escalated things in a way that felt frightening. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nadia. "Don't worry about today. They're all bark." But Brielle knew better. She had seen the look in Colton's eyes, the way his jaw had tightened when Nadia called him a bully. This wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. She walked to her closet and pushed aside the hanging garments, revealing a collection of medals and certificates hidden behind them. National fencing championships, saber certifications, tournament victories spanning 7 years of dedicated training. Her grandfather's legacy lived in those achievements, in the discipline and strength that had been forged through countless hours of practice. Her phone rang, and her grandfather's voice filled the room with its familiar warmth. "Little star, you sound troubled. Tell me what's weighing on your spirit." Brielle found herself pouring out the entire story, from the daily humiliations to Nadia's friendship to the escalating tension. Her grandfather listened without interruption, the way he always did, letting the words flow until they were exhausted. "And you have told no one about your training," her grandfather said finally. "It wasn't a question. You taught me that true courage is shown through restraint," Brielle replied, "that the greatest victory is the one that avoids a conflict." "Yes, child. But I also taught you that there comes a point when restraint becomes inaction, when silence emboldens cruelty. The willow bends, but it doesn't break, and when the gale ends, it grows back tall again." The conversation continued late into the night, exploring the delicate balance between peace and justice, between turning the other cheek and standing up for what was right. By the time they hung up, Brielle felt something shifting inside her, a quiet determination that had been building for weeks, finally coalescing into purpose. The next morning dawned with an unexpected warmth to the school grounds. Students had shed their heavy coats, and the atmosphere felt different, more explosive somehow. Brielle noticed the change immediately, the way conversations seemed more intense, glances more meaningful. Word had spread about yesterday's confrontation, and the entire school seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the next act to unfold. She found Nadia at their usual spot in the art studio, but something was off. Her friend's usual bright smile was forced, and there were dark shadows under her eyes that suggested a sleepless night. "Everything okay?" Brielle asked, settling into the stool beside her. Nadia hesitated, then pulled out her phone. The screen showed a series of messages, each one more hateful than the last. Anonymous accounts had bombarded her social media with cruel comments, doctored images, and threats. The harassment had followed her home, invaded her personal space, and transformed her online life into a nightmare. "They're really targeting you," Brielle said softly, scrolling through the messages. Her hands trembled slightly as she read words designed to wound, to isolate, to destroy. "I can handle it," Nadia said, but her voice lacked conviction. I didn't expect them to be so relentless, or so organized." As if summoned by their conversation, Colton and his friends appeared at the art studio doorway. They couldn't enter without risking Ms. Albright's intervention, but they didn't need to. Their presence was message enough, a reminder that there was no true sanctuary, no place where their influence couldn't reach. Colton caught Brielle's eye and grinned, the expression cold and calculating. He mouthed something that might have been soon or kaboom. The exact word didn't matter. The meaning was perfectly clear. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of anticipation. Teachers noticed the tension, the way students seemed to gather in groups, whispering with unusual intensity. But like always, They remained willfully oblivious to the undercurrents that shaped their students' lives. It was during the lunch break that everything finally came to a head. Brielle and Nadia had found a quiet spot behind the gymnasium, away from the main crowd. They were sharing a container of strawberries and discussing weekend plans when the jeering began. "Look what we've got here," Colton's voice sliced through the afternoon air like a knife. The odd couple hiding away as usual. They approached with theatrical arrogance, their movements coordinated like a pack of wolves. Behind them trailed a larger group of students, drawn by the promise of drama. Someone had already started recording with their phone. "We thought you should know," Finn said, his voice dripping with false concern, "that we've been reflecting on your little speech yesterday, Petrova. Really inspirational stuff. Especially the part about us being bullies," Dom added, his tone deceptively casual. "That really got to us, made us want to prove you wrong." Nadia stood up, her chin raised defiantly. "I'm not scared of you." "Maybe you should be," Colton said, stepping closer. "See, the thing is, we can't let that kind of disrespect slide. Bad for our image, you know." The circle of students tightened, and Brielle felt the familiar sensation of being trapped, of having no escape route. But this time was different. This time, Nadia was beside her, and the protective instinct that had been building for weeks suddenly flared into something stronger. "Just leave us alone," Brielle said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We haven't done anything to you," Colton laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Haven't done anything. Your little friend here called me a bully in front of half the school. That's not something I can let slide." "She was right," Brielle said, the words surprising everyone, including herself. "You are a bully. All of you." The silence that followed was complete, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the rustle of leaves in the trees. Colton's face went through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous purple. "What did you just say?" "I said you're a bully," Brielle repeated, louder this time. "You pick on people who won't defend themselves because you're too afraid to face anyone who might actually challenge you. You're pathetic." The words hung in the air like a drawn sword. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, phones raised, capturing every moment of what was clearly going to be a defining confrontation. Colton's composure finally shattered. "You want to see pathetic? I'll show you pathetic." He lunged forward, his hands reaching for Brielle's jacket. The fabric tore with a loud ripping sound, exposing her thin shoulders and the simple camisole underneath. The crowd gasped, and someone snickered, but Brielle barely heard them. Something fundamental shifted inside her, like a dam bursting or a cage door swinging open. The months of humiliation, the daily erosion of her dignity, the sight of Nadia's tears, it all coalesced into a single moment of perfect clarity. Colton was still grinning, holding the torn fabric like a trophy when Brielle's fist connected with his nose. The sound was sharp and wet, like a twig snapping, and blood immediately began to flow. His head snapped back, and he stumbled, shock replacing the cruel amusement in his eyes. "Oh my God," someone whispered, and the crowd erupted in chaos. But Brielle wasn't finished. Years of training had taught her to see openings, to recognize when an opponent was vulnerable. As Colton tried to regain his balance, she swept his legs, sending him crashing to the ground. The movement was fluid, economical, beautiful in its precision. Finn rushed forward, probably intending to help his friend, but Brielle spun to face him. Her stance was different now, balanced, centered, radiating a quiet confidence that made him hesitate. "Don't," she said simply, and something in her voice made him stop. Dom took a step back, his bravado evaporating as he processed what he had just witnessed. This wasn't the scared, silent girl they had been tormenting. This was someone else entirely, someone who moved with deadly grace and spoke with unshakable authority. Colton rolled over, blood streaming from his nose, and looked up at Brielle with a mixture of pain and disbelief. You broke my nose." "I could have broken a lot more," Brielle replied calmly, but I chose not to. Remember that. She knelt beside him, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. You want to know what pathetic looks like? It's lying on the ground, bleeding, because you picked on someone you thought was weak. It's spending so much time making other people feel small that you forgot how to be anything else. She stood up, brushing dirt from her knees, and looked around at the circle of stunned faces. Anyone else want to try something? The silence stretched on, broken only by Colton's labored breathing and the distant sound of footsteps as teachers finally began to respond to the commotion. But Brielle wasn't done. She turned to face the crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. I'm tired of being afraid, she said. I'm tired of watching good people get hurt because the rest of us are too scared to do anything about it. This ends now. Nadia stepped forward, her face glowing with admiration and something that might have been love. Brielle. I should have done this weeks ago, Brielle said, taking Nadia's hand. I should have stood up for myself, for you, for everyone they've hurt. I'm sorry it took me so long. As the teachers arrived and began to restore order, as statements were taken and consequences discussed, the entire dynamic of Oakhaven Academy shifted. The untouchable elite had been touched and found wanting. The scared girl had revealed herself to be a warrior, and the warrior had shown mercy. In the weeks that followed, the changes were subtle but profound. Colton returned to school with a bandage on his nose and a considerably diminished entourage. His friends, having witnessed the swift and decisive nature of his defeat, began to distance themselves from the casual cruelty that had once defined their group. Nadia and Brielle's friendship deepened into something more, their shared experience creating a bond that transcended the usual boundaries of high school relationships. They were seen together constantly, two people who had found in each other the courage to be authentically themselves. But perhaps the most significant change was in Brielle herself. The girl who had once tried to disappear now walked with quiet confidence, her head held high, her voice clear and strong. She had learned that true courage wasn't about having the power to hurt others. It was about having the courage to protect what mattered, even when that meant revealing parts of yourself you had kept hidden. The story of that day spread through the school like wildfire, growing and changing with each telling. But the core message remained constant. Sometimes the quietest people are the ones who take everyone by surprise. Sometimes the person you think is weakest is actually the strongest of all. And sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, you discover that you were never really alone in the first place.